You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Hello, it's January the 9th. This is episode 309. We're in the new year, but we are starting off strong. Renaud's with me. Hello, Renaud.
Yeah, how you doing? Happy
Hi.
New Year to everybody here.
Yeah, Happy New Year to all the listeners. Thanks for being with us in 2025, and you're still with us in 2026, which is awesome. Now, today we're I'm thinking square pegs and round holes, right? We're going to talk about working with manufacturers that have the right experience and capabilities to make your product. And in a way, that sounds like common sense, but it may not always be the case, right? So I just want to have a discussion around this topic and really lay it on the line for the listeners on maybe what is a good or not a good idea.
Right. Yeah, and here we're not talking about basic things like, oh, they need to be ISO 9001 certified, oh, they need to be used to exporting, and working with export customers, or they need to, whatever, have some English-speaking salespeople, or they, whatever. Like, all of this is basic due diligence. And I believe we covered that in earlier episodes of the podcast a while ago.
Oh, yeah. Goodness me. Yeah, more than once, I think.
Right. So all that like basic due diligence, at least work with people, that are not totally, how to say, unsuitable, like unable to work with you. Okay. But what I see is that even people who've been working with Chinese manufacturers for years and years still make the same mistake. Is that they don't really understand the kind of manufacturing facility that will be a good fit for such and such project, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then people have blind spots, okay, but I just see a lot of blind spots in this area, right? And having set up and grown our own manufacturing company, obviously I have my own perspective on that. Because sometimes we are quite a good fit for a certain project, and sometimes we're not a good fit for a certain project, right? And it's much better if everybody is clear about that from the beginning. If we're not a good fit for a project, well, let's stop the discussion right away. Like, we're just wasting everybody's time, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, people don't really think in terms of, okay, what's the relevant experience? It's a lot about the experience and the ability to handle certain things, basically, right? So that's the idea for today's podcast.
So, to give a perspective of what we mean in practice, right? I understand that recently a potential customer of ours asked if their existing plastic or metal suppliers would be able to put together an electronic product, sorry. And so, again, if you're listening, you might be thinking, oh, okay, yeah, maybe that could happen. But there are some reasons why this probably isn't a good idea, right?
Right. So, in that specific case, I was talking with a company that's very, very, very experienced in working with Chinese manufacturers. And, been working with Chinese manufacturers for dozens of years. And, on a variety of different products. However, it's all what I would call mechanical products. It doesn't really mean that they have a lot of mechanical moving parts, but like, mechanisms and things like that, but they're non-electrical, non-electronic, right? And then suddenly some of their customers are pushing them into some electronic products, right? Because, hey, every kind of product is kind of getting smart, and there's more and more things you can do with electronics these days, and so on. So, okay, they look into that. And then they have some of their existing suppliers, right, that they've been working with for a while, and they have a history, they have confidence. And then they're saying, well, maybe this plastic supplier, or maybe this metal supplier that makes whatever, some folded sheet metal, and powder coating and whatever, and maybe some welding. And okay, hey, maybe these guys, they would be a good fit for, making the product. After all, how complicated is it? And then I had to explain to them, okay, wait. What is required for putting together a relatively high quality electronic product, right? First, who's going to do the engineering design? Okay. So maybe they have a plan. Okay. Some, design engineers going to do this. Okay. Who's going to validate the engineering design work? Okay. Already not so sure, right? Here we're talking about obviously testing prototypes and verifying all the product requirements, but also things like reliability testing and a few other things. And okay, so there's something else we need to think of. Okay, and for sure it's not going to be the manufacturers because they have zero experience in that. Okay, and then who will prepare the testing stations for the electronic functions? Oh, well, that's a good question. Are there some engineering companies that can do that, or what? Well, yeah. I mean, there's some whatever what people often call the jig suppliers and things like that. Yeah, specialized suppliers can do it, but you got to tell them exactly what requirements and so on. You need to know how to test it and so on. And if you're just a metal supplier or a plastic supplier, you probably don't know these guys. Anyway, okay. Then when you work on electronic components and the printed circuit boards and things like that, and you handle them. Well, handling them in itself, requires quite a few precautions, right?
Yeah.
There's IPC standard. IPC is these IPC standards are the kind of the Bible of what you get to do, and one of them is all about just handling the printed circuit boards, because some of the components are very sensitive to static electricity, for example. Okay, among other things, right? So they don't know about that. Okay, that's going to be fun. How are they going to address that? Right? They're going to have to set up a line and put the whatever ESD wristbands on people and things like that, and then going to have to keep some a level of discipline on the workers who probably don't have any experience with that and are not used to that. To keep wearing it always at the right time and so on. Okay. And then there's some specialized work, some of the operations. I mean, typically soldering, right? Is everything going to be through connectors, or are you going to do some soldering? If you do some soldering, so you're going to have to hire some specialized operators, right? Is probably not something you can teach an operator in a few days, right? So are they willing to do that? Obviously, a trained, experienced soldering operator is not as cheap as what I would call a basic assembly worker, right? Okay. But it's not just the operators, it's also quality control, right? So the quality engineers, the IPQC, in-process quality control inspectors who monitor things, the finished goods inspectors for the outgoing quality control inspections and so on. Well, if they have no experience with electronics, again, they are going to have some blind spots, right? If something is not done properly, who's going to pick up on that? That's a little bit scary, right? So if you just hire one person who has a lot of experience, that one person will not be everywhere, and you cannot have the same one person involved in the production side and then the QC inspection side. Okay, you get a little bit of how to say it, objectivity issue here, and that might come back to bite you. So yeah, there's a lot of things here. Yeah, incoming QC, how they're going to check the electronic and electrical components, etc., etc., etc. Right, and that's just one example. But if people don't understand what is very specific and what is required for a certain project, then they go into totally the wrong kind of supplier. Okay. What we see often, because we have a number projects coming to us after the customer went with the wrong supplier, made mistakes. Then they kind of try to salvage the project, right? And then they, okay, they did this, they did that, blah, 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 right? And for example, last year we had a project, the customer had already spent money on tooling, but the tooling basically had to be discarded, right? And they moved the project to us, and we told them, okay, everything has to be, reworked, and forget about the tooling. These guys did not even do design for manufacturing on the product. They get the design files from the customer. The customer said, oh, okay, it's fine, it works. And they were like, oh, okay. So next step is the tooling, send the money. And then the customer was like, okay, because they didn't know better. Okay, let's send the money. Nobody did DFM, design for manufacturing, which is, obviously the one thing you need to do. So nobody worked on actually validating all the design work and ensuring that there's good alignment with what the manufacturing processes can achieve. And in some cases, that kind of supplier can do a good job if you have a big engineering team managing them and if you know exactly what you're doing, right? I often say that Apple has more than 10,000 people on the ground in China. It's probably still true in 2026. And what are all these people doing? Well, they are kind of making the link, most of them, between what the industrial designers in Cupertino want or dream of and what the manufacturers can do. And yes, there is that much work, right? If you want to make really good products. So that's an example right here, right? If you don't know what your project requires, you're gonna go in the arms of the wrong supplier, probably, right? Some others are kind of obvious. You want a product that's really nicely finished, right? And then you go to a manufacturer that is working predominantly with customers that want high volume, low cost kind of products. Okay. If you see that your supplier is working mainly with companies like Walmart, and then you ask them to make products like Apple, something's going to go wrong. You're not going to reach your objectives here, right? I'm exaggerating, obviously, with Apple because only Apple can make Apple kind of products, in most cases. But you get the point. What is the main focus of the company? Is it cost control? Is it doing an amazing job reaching meeting the vision of the industrial designers? What is it? Because these are not the same companies, right? And this goes back decades and decades. I think it was a guy called Wheeler who wrote about that in the 80s, I believe, is that, the factory is focused. You got to have a focused factory. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot of confusion, a lot of extra costs, et cetera, et cetera. And you cannot have one factory that's focused on 5 different things, right? You got to focus them on a certain kind of work and so on. So if cost control is extremely important for your main customer, you can set up your organization to focus on that. Your whole organization, okay, great. But if you have another big customer that requires something completely different, totally different focus, being extremely innovative and trying new things and so on, it's going to be a battle. Everybody's going to be conflicted. And one of them is going to prevail in the long run. You cannot be focused on 2 or 3 different things. Okay. Apart from that, obviously, if you have a class 2 or class 3 medical device, right, or it's a highly regulated product, you cannot go with a factory that has never made any medical device. Okay. This is basic, Same thing with aeronautics, aerospace, they call it aerospace parts. Same thing with railway parts, automotive, anything that goes into a OEM vehicle, etc., etc., etc. Right?
Mm.
You got to pick the right horse, and if you notice you're on the wrong horse, well, you better jump off before it's too late. And maybe it's already too late. Sorry for that. But
Mm.
if you're on the wrong horse, the wrong horse will not bring you to your destination. I think it's very, very clear.
Mm. How common is it these days that you would go to a supplier in China, for example? Let's say, in the case that we were talking about before, you've got your existing metal supplier, and you'll say to them, "Hi guys, I know we're getting our metal components from you, but we actually want to work with you to put the product together." How common is it that they would, even though they know that they don't have a lot of experience, they would sort of give it a good go and say, "Yeah, sure, we'll take your business. We can do it." Like it, because it almost
Oh,
sounds a bit sketchy.
um, yeah, but you know, it's China, right? They will give it a
Yes.
try. So, of course,
Yes.
if they're very busy and they've had a few bad experiences and things like that, and they're really to be cautious, they will say, and not really, right? But the temptation would be here because they're going to be thinking, well, if it's
Mm.
another supplier that does assembly, that other supplier is kind of in control of the supply chain, right? We're going to have to sell to them and so on. Who knows if they're going to pay us on time, blah, blah, blah. And maybe, the customer is going to go to another supplier that will also do what we do, right? So
Mm.
no need for us. We're going to be kicked out. That project is going to slip through our fingers. So the temptation is always there, and I can understand it. And if the factory has a lot of extra capacity, they're kind of hungry for new business. They see that 2026 is probably not going to be great, and they're like, well, if this project is sizable enough, we'll hire one or two key people, and they'll just,
Mm.
they'll take care of everything that we don't know, right? Well, how hard is it? Electronics, let's go and let's, by hook or by crook or whatever. I don't know how the Americans say, they have a saying like that, right?
Hmm.
Oh, fake it until you make it.
That's probably better, yeah.
Very Silicon Valley kind of style, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, and the thing is, in the Chinese manufacturing sector, a lot of the companies that grew big because they followed that. They have this attitude. Okay, they really jumped on every opportunity. Sometimes they fell on their faces, and sometimes, a big project drove them to nice success, right? And people observe that and they're like, okay, that's the path to success. If I overly cautious, then I will turn down a lot of things. But if I grab them and then after that I kind of, wrestle with them, and after a while, with a bit of luck and a lot of hard work and picking the right people and tapping my network, etc., we'll find a way to make it work, right? And maybe this project that sounds kind of so-so, well, maybe if the product is very successful in the marketplace, maybe we can make a lot of money. Okay. And
Mm.
it's not just the Chinese. I mean, let's be very clear.
Yes.
A lot of companies everywhere have done that, especially in
Yep.
Silicon Valley. I mean, these days there's a lot of talk about Palantir, right? The Peter Thiel company that is a major service provider to the Department of Defense or War, or whatever they call it now, in the US.
Mm.
And Peter Thiel, the founder, was very clear. Oh yeah, at the beginning, we had some people from the Pentagon come and visit us, and we didn't really know, so we like kind of staged things like a proper office, even though it was a small team of people working whatever, half of the time from home or whatever. Like if they saw reality, it would not look like a proper company. So they had to script it and work on the appearances
Mm.
and kind of oversell their capabilities a little bit, but work on the appearances and talk to Chinese companies, and they know very well that the appearances must be massaged a little bit sometimes.
Mm, mm,
And
yeah.
well, Chinese culture, right? Appearances is quite important, and they're good at that. They're good at giving a nice first impression. The salespeople, will push the whole organization and production and everybody. Hey, this potential customer visiting us tomorrow morning, very important. Like, make sure everything is clean. Blah 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 blah. And like, they will keep pressure on everybody. And sometimes they'll be producing stuff that's actually not something they usually produce. There's this book called "Poorly Made in China" by Paul Midler. It's an interesting book, with some stories that you know are still representative of what a chip buyer would found with a certain kind of Chinese suppliers. Certain things haven't changed. Well, it tells the story. Actually, it's the main story throughout the book of a U.S. Buyer, very cheap, always looking for the lowest price, and sending him, so the author of the book, to Shantou, right, a city in Guangdong, but all the way to the east of Guangdong, which is itself, often a little bit shady, right? There's some places like Shantou, sometimes Wenzhou, like, so there's some shady stuff there.
Yeah, they're known for like gangsters and things.
Oh, hell yeah. And mafia, I call them. And the manufacturer, the so-called shampoo manufacturer, had a line running and whatever, 40, 50 people. And they bring the guy, okay, now, come in and see this and see this and see this. Oh, okay, okay, okay. And then he kind of have a little feeling that, something's a bit off. They're doing stuff, but, it's a bit weird. And they're doing things like, don't really see the logic. Okay. And then the visit is over and it's like, oh, I forgot something. I don't know, his bag or something. And then I ran upstairs and then everything was dark already. Like, oh, and actually the whole thing was just a fake production line. Like, they were not making shampoo. They had set it up. They probably got some temporary workers or, some workers from whatever, a brother or a cousin's factory. Hey, send some people over and let's get a little bit of equipment and let's, with some shampoo bottles and something that looks like shampoo, and let's put it in the bottles and let's close and let's pack, or maybe not even pack, but like, okay, and then we stage a 15 minutes visit so we can see, and then we kind of rush him out, and that's it. Everybody can go back. Sometimes, that's kind of extreme, but I'm sure it happened more than once, right?
Oh yeah, it sounds a bit far-fetched, but I can believe it. And if you're not used to being in China or Asia, you'll be hearing and thinking that is crazy. But yeah, I can well believe that.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right. And again, it's not just China. Okay, I'm sure there's some
No,
stories
no,
like
no.
that in various places in Europe and so on, right? So it is a risk. You get to know the limits of a specific potential supplier and what the requirements of a certain project are. Okay, you cannot count on the manufacturer to tell you, no, 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 like, we've never done that. Oh yeah, we make electronics, but we, like, for example, when we started at Julian, like, consumer electronics, IT products, audio video products, yeah. But some kind of electrical home appliance, no, it was too early. Took us years to get some experience on that, right?
Yes.
So capabilities grow over time, but you got to be very aware, that sometimes it's too early, and there's certain things like, some complex heavy machinery and things like that. Well, if the customer is on site and, there's the design and blah, 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 like their engineers are here together, okay, we can industrialize and produce, but we know our limitations. Like, we're not going to tell them, oh, okay, just let us handle everything. at a certain level of complexity, we'll say, sorry, guys, we're going to need some inputs from your side, right? Some hand holding here, right? And that's
Yeah.
normal. That is a sign of a good factory, right? The guys who
Mm.
will say, okay, just leave it to us and try to figure it out. Again, the likelihood that you will not be very happy as the buyer is not that low, right? So do you want to take that chance?
Mm. Absolutely. And I'm thinking, if you are thinking of using certain manufacturer, but you've got some question marks over their experience or capabilities, the cost of actually sending somebody in to audit that experience and the capabilities that they've got on the factory floor, the staff, the equipment, the cost of doing that is minimal in comparison of the cost of working with them, having a disaster, and then having to switch to another manufacturer, such as what's happened with our own customers who have come to us in some cases, right?
Yeah. And factory audit can reveal some of that, like, oh, they really do something very different, or, things like that.
Yeah.
And, oh, this is what they do in-house. Okay, but what our product needs, in-house operations are kind of different. Okay. It needs to be coupled with an analysis, right? And you need to kind of understand these kind of things, or work with people who know these kind of things and tell them exactly what you're looking for and or what you need, right? What you need is an on-site audit, yes, plus some analysis.
Yep. Okay. So there you go. That's what you need to avoid falling into this trap. So in 2026, as you are perhaps sourcing new suppliers, food for thought there. Thanks, Renaud.
All right, thank you.
Thanks everybody for listening. We will be back next week as usual.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.